Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, let's get started with Act 3, Scene 3. And so, Act 3, Scene 3 starts with Romeo is hiding out in the chapel with Friar Lawrence. And he is told by Friar Lawrence that his punishment is just banishment, so he should actually be pretty happy. He says the prince could have easily sentenced you to death, right? And so you should see the good in this situation. At least you aren't being put to death. You have a chance to live. You just can't live here. And Romeo feels that his fate of banishment is far worse, since now he will have to live separate from his wife, Juliet. And this, he feels, is a more harsh punishment, which results in him falling onto the floor weeping. The nurse arrives to find Romeo weeping on the floor, and during this process he takes out his dagger and attempts to stab himself with it. The nurse grabs the dagger away from him. Now, could this have been a false attempt? Maybe. But Romeo is in complete agony. He truly feels this is the worst thing that's ever happened to him. He believes that he'll never see Juliet again. And based upon what we know, he doesn't make the best logical decisions. Therefore, this is probably a fair, had the nurse not been there, he probably would have stabbed himself. So the nurse takes the dagger away. Friar Lawrence is continuing trying to get Romeo to see the brighter side, the good side of things, like at least you'll still be alive, and so forth and so on. Juliet's still alive. Everyone has their health. The nurse tries to order him to stand up. He won't. And the friar convinces Romeo to visit Juliet later that night, and that they will escape in the morning. Which leads us to Act 3, Scene 4. Act 3, Scene 4 is pretty interesting. It's very short, as you see here. It's just from here to here. And what's taking place is it's about to be bedtime, if you will. And we're inside the Capulet household, where the elders are getting ready for bed. Lord Capulet and Lady Capulet, as well as Paris. As well as Paris. Now, they've been up all morning, mourning the death of Tybalt, right, a family member. And they've noticed that Juliet has been in despair. She hasn't left her room. She's been weeping, and they believe it is the result of the loss of her cousin Tybalt. They don't know that she is married to Romeo. They don't know that she is upset and crying because of the banishment and the thought of never seeing Romeo again. So because of this, Lord Capulet decides right there that Paris and Juliet will be married. He believes this news will help resolve her sorrows. Again, he thinks that she's upset about Tybalt's death. He declares that the wedding will take place later that week. And orders Lady Capulet to inform Juliet about the marriage proposal. And then they go to bed, and the scene ends. So that brings us to scene 5 here. The last scene of Act 3. Oh, went too far. And so this scene starts where it's the next morning. They're laying in bed. And when I say they, I mean Romeo and Juliet. Laying in bed, and they're pretending that the night hadn't passed. Trying to spend every second with each other, pretending, hoping and wishing that the night time would stay still and they could stay in this moment forever. Well, the nurse arrives and explains that Lady Capulet is approaching. So Romeo says his goodbyes and descends down the balcony. Okay, it's here. So Lady Capulet enters, and she tells Juliet the marriage plan that her father had come up with the night before. Thinking that the news is going to make her daughter excited and happy and cheerful, it is only to her surprise that Juliet refuses to marry Paris and instead insists that she marry Romeo. Now, her mother takes this as kind of like a rhetorical thing, like, oh, I would rather do X than that, right? Thinking that she doesn't necessarily mean she wants to marry Romeo. She's just saying that she would rather marry anyone on the planet than Paris. Lord Capulet enters. And when he hears that she has refused, he becomes furious. And he basically demands she prepare for the marriage on the upcoming Thursday. Now, this is a completely different side of Lord Capulet than what we saw in the previous act, where he didn't just want to marry off his daughter because he had the power to. He wanted to make sure she was happy, make sure she was loved, and make sure she wanted it as well. Whereas here, all of a sudden, it's a different side. During this process of Lord Capulet explaining to Juliet that she doesn't have a choice, that this is what's going to happen, and that she needs to be ready for it next Thursday, right here, Lady Capulet, as well as the nurse, refuse to intercede. They don't do anything to try to convince Lord Capulet to change his mind. They don't stand up for Juliet on her behalf. They simply do nothing. And in fact, the nurse even, you could call it, betrays Juliet by insisting that she believes that Paris is a fine gentleman and is worthy of her marriage, or her hand in marriage, and that she will be happy with Paris. And you can feel the hurt in Juliet when she calls the nurse ancient damnation. And she dismisses the nurse from the room. She doesn't want to see her. Okay? And this is here, the ancient damnation, O most wicked fiend. Oh, ancient damnation, O most wicked fiend. referring to the nurse. And this brings us to the end of Act 3, Scene 5. We'll do another one once we finish Act 4. Okay, if there are any questions, go ahead and email me. But yep, this is where we'll stop. And let me know if there's any questions. And have a good day.